Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to PMI Live. Getting more out the door better, increase productivity and quality with Rich Seddon, Sean Buckland, and me, Susanna Clark. So PMI Live, as its name suggests, is a live and interactive experience. So we are developing this all the time, and that means we're going to try new things. And so we appreciate your patience as we experiment, and we look forward to your feedback.
Some of them will work, some of them may not, so bear with us.
So today we're going to be using polls, and that's where the testing starts straight away. We're using a new Zoom poll feature today. When we get to that, we'll explain a bit more about it. Obviously, we're using the chat and really would love you to share any questions you have for Rich, for Sean, or for myself. We're going to have a panel discussion and conversation, and that's where the next new feature comes in, where we are looking to open up the mics. So what we'd like you to do is post any questions you have and let me know whether you want to say this out loud. And ideally, we'll open the mic and you can ask Rich or Sean yourselves.
Which is as exciting as it is terrifying.
So hello to everyone who's also joining us via our live streams on LinkedIn, on Facebook and YouTube. We'd love for you to join in the fun here and trying out all these new features. So if in future you would like to have a go, then do register. You can do this at pmi.co.uk/webinars. Come on in and join us.
Ryan's saying that that's available still now, aren't I? So
it is available still now. You can join right this minute. So let's get going. Rich, over to you. What are you going to talk us through today?
So as the title suggests, it is about productivity, getting more out the door better. So I'll explain shortly why this topic. But what I would like to point out, first of all, is this isn't just about manufacturing productivity. This is around getting more out the door in any environment, be it service, right through to manufacturing and everything in between. So let me share my screen and just show you what we're going to go through today. So what are we going to talk about today? It's going to set the scene, as I mentioned. Why this topic? Why now? And then we're going to think about and ask you in the poll that Sue's mentioned, how do the things that we've described resonate in your organization? Based on what we discover through that process, we've got a working theory that you may or may not disprove at that point. So that'll be a fascinating journey to be on, see how we go. And then once we've talked about that working theory, we've got 5 topics, and this is where we'll open up into the panel discussion. It'll be ourselves, and Susie's manning the Q&A desk here so she can see the comments coming in, and we'll talk to you more about that. But have a think as you go through anything you would like us to ask. Don't leave us hanging and keep us on our toes, please. So why this? Let's do this scene setting piece first of all. Why this topic and why now? So there's 8 things on the screen here. Let me rattle through them and I'll come back and explain each one. So we've got labor availability, the changing relationship with work, inflation, cost of capital, supply chain disruption, resource scarcity, accountability and scrutiny, and sustainability. So let me step these through. Think about topic number 1, labor availability. In many parts of the developed world, populations and demographics are changing. Birth rates are reducing in many places. Got an aging population, and the pandemic has accelerated many people's choices in relation to work. Some interesting statistics coming out of the National Office for Statistics in the UK, which is demonstrating the percentage of people that became economically inactive during the pandemic and have chosen not to return to the labour force afterwards. And a particular UK problem as well is obviously some of the challenges that Brexit has presented with migration combined with the pandemic. But this is a common story wherever you are. And you look at the EU statistics from Eurostat on unemployment. Not only did it reach nothing like the levels we saw in the financial crisis just over a decade ago, it's also now at record lows. So it all adds up to making a challenge that removes the choice of relying on getting more and more people. So we're going to ask about you shortly in the poll, how these are resonating with you. So this is a particularly pandemic-related concept but one that's changing over time. The pandemic's accelerated the changing relationship with work. Last month, PMI Live was dedicated to hybrid working, which is just one element of how the relationship with work is changing for people. Employee expectations, their demands, the levels of flexibility are changing at a pace that we've rarely seen before. And that's adding extra challenges on the productivity concept. How do we accommodate these requirements for the relationship and the new demands and the new requirements and expectations, reasonable or unreasonable, that people may have within the workforce? And I should say these are in no particular order as we run through. So jumping on to inflation, very current problem in most developed economies. And quite pronounced for the first time in many years. That's encouraging all kinds of different conversations, whether it's wage inflation or price inflation or commodity inflation that we're seeing in many different areas and different parts of our operations. That's requiring us to think differently, and it has removed an option, as has the next one, at the cost of capital. For the first time in well over a decade since the financial crisis, many economies are seeing interest rates return to a more normal-ish level, whatever normal might be, but certainly a more meaningful level, having been at zero or below zero in many places around the world. That's going to transform corporate and organizational relationships with the ability to invest, which is providing yet another challenge. And add to that the supply chain disruptions that in many places have been extremely well publicized. So everything from the semiconductor shortage that's affecting the world, we have to pause for thought for a minute. And I can see there's several of our automotive clients on the call today, to pause and think, we're in a situation where many of the world's largest automotive producers are unable to take orders for their best-selling models. That is a profound and shocking situation, and indicative of the disruption that's in the supply chain at the moment. And then you've got the well-publicized issues of things like free flow through shipping, the availability of containers, shipping rates transforming. All that has led to different types of supply chain shortages. And building on that point, resource scarcity. So it's fair to say that resources of most kinds, whether it's your office floor plates through to actually a commodity scarcity, is becoming more and more of an issue in different places. Again, just referring back to the automotive industry, one of the constraints to growth in many electronic industries is the availability of rare earth elements. So what I'm looking for. Yeah, that just demonstrates and leads on to the theory that we're going to express shortly. But this whole mix and meld of different things from labor availability that you could see were seemingly unrelated are culminating in some very similar challenges, which is why we've represented it as this jigsaw, that they're kind of interlocking with each other. And it's by no means as even as this. They're often just stacked on top of one another. And add to that the increased level of corporate and organizational and governmental accountability and scrutiny that things like social media have added to us, that means that standards are more easy to scrutinize, more visible to the public, more visible to the press, and higher levels of accountability are being expected almost day by day of organizations as a result of their delivery, of how they deliver their products and services. Barely a day goes by when some other element isn't being discovered of corporate behavior. And the responsibilities within your supply chains, many European economies in the last couple of years have had much focus put upon the fast fashion arena, where supply chains haven't been particularly well controlled and understood by the end vendor, and that is no longer acceptable to consumers. And it's a real world problem that we're living with. And my final point here is one of sustainability. And in this context, on this slide, I'm talking about environmental sustainability. So you take all of those things I've just been talking about, from labor availability, the change of relationship with work, inflation, supply chain, overlay sustainability and the moral requirement to use as fewer resources as possible, we've got a really interesting set of challenges in our hands. And I'm starting to develop a theory here that now is the time that we need CI more than we ever have done. So given those descriptions that I've just taken you through, we're going to go straight to a poll. And I'd like to ask you this question. Thinking about the impact of those things I've just described in your organizations, are they impacting you in a significant way? We've got the items I've just gone through, top to bottom on the left-hand side, from labor availability to sustainability. And then across the top, we're asking you to respond of how likely these things are to impact you, from unlikely to impact, might impact, likely to impact in the near future, to impacting now. Now, if you haven't got the latest version of Zoom or a later version of Zoom are very non-specific with this as to which one it might be, a version issued post-November 2021, you may not be able to respond to this poll. It should be on your screen now. If you can't see it, pop your answers in the chat. Which are the key ones for you? Just let us know that are impacting you now or likely to in the near future. Same thing if you're on the live streams, pop it in the comments. Suze has got her eye on the live streams over here on the screen, and we'll be able to see your responses. So I can see that has gone live. Take a few moments to consider each one. And I see some people are responding, which is good news. Some of you have the later versions of Zoom, which is a relief to us all, because we did not have one we prepared earlier for this slide, I've just realized. Okay, so I'm just going to let you respond to that and see responses popping in. That's fantastic.
Actually, it's great, isn't it? This is it's very interesting.
Few of the day.
Yes, interesting to see how this is working. You guys can't see our screen, obviously, but the technology is very interesting. The way that it demonstrates how you're answering across that range and rank that we're using.
Okay.
Nice feature, I think. Use this again.
Yeah, and if you can't use it, and as I say, do put your response in the chat. But bear in mind, there's quite a lot of questions there. We're just going to give you longer than we normally would in one of these polls to respond. And we're viewing how we can see the results. Yeah,
so I'm thinking that if you pop it into the chat, put in the let's say labor availability as an example, and then basically where you would rank that impacting now. So that would be great. Thank you. I can see people starting to do that's really, really useful.
Fantastic. So we've got a whole plethora of data appearing live on the screen, which we're doing our best to interpret in real time. Okay, so we'll just give you a few more seconds on that, and then our colleague Charlie will draw that to a close. Okay, great. Looks like I can see the charts have stopped moving now, so that'd be great, Charlie. If you could end that poll and then share the results, that'd be brilliant. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. And what we don't know is whether people that don't have the later versions of Zoom can see the results. We know you can't participate, but whether you can see the results. So Sean and myself are going to interpret these as we go through. So on labour availability, we've got 46% of respondents saying it's impacting them now.
And I've got in the chat also labour impacting now as well in the different chats. So
okay. What would be great is if you could give us some narrative on that for the panel discussion. Please put in the chat as well if you've got any comments, any thoughts, if there's any particular issues of any that I've described or other ones that are driving those impacts now. That'd be great to hear. So on changing relationship with work, we have got 38% as the highest response on impacting now. On inflation, we have a slightly more mixed picture. But it is dominated by likely to impact in the future and impacting now. And some people we're all very envious of responding no, not likely to impact at all, which is fantastic. So cost of capital, let's have a look at that one. So again, overwhelming, impacting now, 46% streets ahead of all the other responses. Supply chain disruption, this will be an interesting one. We've got a magic number here of 46%. And I'm just going to hover over that. Yeah, 46% with the nearest next response on might impact at 21%. And then resource scarcity. We've got 42% on impacting now. Boy, oh boy, I had some theories on this, but I wasn't expecting to have hit the nail on the head quite so much with the issues you're facing. And then slightly more accountability and scrutiny. Now that's interesting. That's slightly more mixed. So still dominated by the likely in the near future or impacting now, 25% and 25%. And then finally on sustainability, that is likely to impact. Suze, can you see that on your screen if you hover over it? Because it's just cutting the...
yes, so impacting now, 29%, likely to impact in near future, 29%, might impact 21%.
Right.
Okay, fantastic.
I've got a number of all impacting now.
Right.
And then a general sense that there is just too much work at the moment and not enough resources, people, etc.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, interesting. Sean, your take on these results?
Yes, no, what's fascinating, I think this, if we drill into the detail of that, there's two different patterns there. There's a group where it's impacting now or is about to, and then there's a group where it's impacting now or it might impact in the future. What we're not seeing is very much evidence of not impacting.
Yeah.
So one way or another, these all seem to be key crucial factors, but it's now or nearly now, which of course nearly now is better. So now is the highest pressure we get. So yes, I think the theory is worth testing.
Okay, right. So we are going to reveal the theory and we're not having to rewrite it. So let me try this.
Which is lucky.
Okay, so here is this working theory. And I point out again, this is a working theory and it's this. The option of simply throwing more at a problem is no longer viable. I'll say that again, the option of simply throwing more at a problem is no longer viable. And this is a challenge. My point earlier on about, is this the moment more than ever that we can rely on CI? This is why I made that statement, because it appears, and you've just provided some more data towards it, that this is the case. In all those examples where you were talking about labor resources, et cetera, and it's clearly having impacts with you and your organizations, the traditional response may not be possible. So before we go into the panel discussion, let's just think about this model. This came out of a discussion with Jane, our chairman. I was throwing this productivity challenge around, and she encouraged me to revisit the Deming's Deming's chain reaction model. Now, anyone that's familiar with the chain reaction model will know that this is an updated and edited version of it to make it relevant to these circumstances, but also current times. So here's how it goes. The improvement of systems and process performance drives less rework, fewer mistakes, fewer delays and bottlenecks, better use of your talent, equipment and resources, which in turn allows you to improve productivity, release latent capacity and talent. Therefore, improve the customer experience and retain and gain customers in order to grow and thrive sustainably. So that's the context and that's the piece we're looking for the almost justification, but some of the rationale from left to right as to why this matters. Sounds like you're going to say something there, Sean.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking when I was looking at this is that second box in from the left is where our waste is creating a bottleneck in our potential. And the one to the left of that then is our leverage point to try and extract that waste from the system, release that capacity back into the organization and get the value to flow again.
So just to be clear then, so you're saying bottleneck here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're creating that bottleneck with our mistakes, our delays, our poorly balanced work lines, etc.
Yeah.
And in order to get the leverage on that, we need to improve the system because we can't just throw more capacity at the bottlenecks.
Got you. Got you. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Now for the next live element, folks. So we're moving into the panel discussion. You'll be relieved. We're going to do a webinar without all that many slides. So again, being brave. Let me work out how to end my slide deck. Stop share, and we will begin the discussion. Stop share. So hopefully you've got our mugs on screen now. Get that off screen. There we go. Okay. So let me take you through 5 key topic areas for which I've just realized I need my slides. I can see both of my colleagues looking at me thinking, hey,
Interesting.
he's changed the running order since they ran through it earlier on.
I have got the data. I could put it straight into chat for people.
If you could put it straight into chat, that'd be great because people need it for reference anyway. And whilst you're buying me some time, I shall
Okay.
reshare my screen. There. Okay. So
It's too excited about getting rid of the slides.
I am too excited about getting rid of the slides. Yes, you're absolutely right, Sean. Right. So here's the 5 key principles. So number 1, understanding the value add. And let's just pitch these correctly. These are the areas, the key principles that we think are worth looking at in order to address this productivity challenge. Now, we're going to move into now a panel discussion on each of these points. Susie's putting them into the chat, so you've got them for reference. As she does that, let me talk you through them. So understanding value add. What do we mean here? It's about the analysing, understanding how and where your processes, your activities, and your people add value. The second one is about improving your agility, your organizational agility. So your ability to detect, anticipate, respond to changes in circumstances, in demand and customer needs. Number 3, reducing complexity. Comes in all manner of guises. It's about identifying and removing unnecessary complexity to enable you to better serve your customers and stakeholders. Number 4, eliminate or reduce variation. Understanding and measuring the sources of variation in your processes and how that can help in order for your organization to respond better to these challenges. And finally, you could view this one as a solution to some ways, but it's a key topic for everyone in CI at the moment and identifying opportunities for automation. Now, what will become apparent as we start talking about these is that each of these key 5 principles are interrelated. We've grouped them up here into topics and principles, but many of them overlap, and you'll see crossovers where complexity is linked to agility and the value adding links to complexity. So these are not silos. They're an attempt to group these together into principles for the purpose of the discussion and for illustration.
So what I would love you to do is, if you've got a question that you'd like to pose to Rich or Sean, then please put your question into the chat. Obviously, we would really love to hear your real voice. So if you're happy, pop your question into the chat and put, Mike next to it, or not as in the name Mike, as in
It's Mike.
microphone. And a yes to indicate you're winning. I will then open up your microphone, and then you'll be able to talk directly to us. That's how we'd love this to go. We'd love to try it with you, so please do be brave. What if you don't want to speak, then please just pop your question in and put a no after it, and I'll make sure I don't open the mic for you, and I will ask it on your behalf. So that's how this is going to work. While you think about that and think about your questions, Rich, can I'd like to start by asking you guys a few questions. I'm interested around the value add, and I think, Sean, I don't know about your thoughts on this. I think it would be helpful to understand where, in your opinion, you would start with this.
Okay, so in our industry, the continuous improvement industry, we talk a lot about the voice of the customer. And my experience is that companies and organizations sometimes get lost in what is the definition of value in their own organizations. So I just want to look at a couple of things where, if we're looking to genuinely improve quality and spend less time and energy on that, achieving that quality, we need to get right back to what the actual definition of voice of customer is. So let's have a look at some of the mistakes that I've seen quite commonly made. First one is people assuming they know who the customer is. And I'm minded of a time where I was working with 20 senior managers from a large organization, and I asked a simple question, except it wasn't. Who is your customer? 20 minutes later, no answer.
Right.
Okay. So how can we define value and make sure all of our systems, our processes are aligned to it if we don't even know who the customer is? So it's not always as obvious as it might seem. And then attached to that is, if we are right about who our customer is, sometimes we can make the mistake of assuming, that horrible word assumption again, we can assume we understand what they need. We might make the assumption that because that's what we're in the contract, That's the definition of value. And a really simple way of testing whether or not you've got this wrong is, are you having the kind of conversations with the customer that says, yeah, but it says here in the contract? Because if you are, that tells you you've gone offline with your value, your definition of value. So either which way, crucially, make sure you properly understand who your customer is and understand exactly what they value. And one of my favorite ways of doing this, go and see.
Right.
Instead of doing the Gemba waste walk, do the Gemba value walk. Get up into your customer's operation. Go and see how they're using your product. Go and see how they're using your service. You may see opportunities to improve that they didn't even know about. So that's my initial thoughts on that. Thanks,
Okay.
Rich.
So you've just reminded me in talking through that of an occasion where I was asked to facilitate a workshop between a customer and supplier. The customer in this circumstance were our customer, and they asked us to help work with them because they were having major relationship problems with the customer, with the supplier and the customer relationship. So in this very room, this is several years ago, what you've just hit the nail on the head with these powers of assumption. And through the process of mapping out the customer journey and the interaction, the process between the customer and the supplier, time and time again around this room, people's faces were just crumpling as they realized they'd been assuming what the customer required was still the same as it previously had been. They'd gone back, it was a regulated industry, and they'd gone back to the contract, to the SLA, and justified why they were delivering them these services in this time frame and in this manner. And the head of procurement that was in the room actually got visibly upset because he'd been driving his team to continually serve the customer in the way that he thought that the customer wanted to be served. And it was fascinating. And it just reminded me of that example.
We've got a question come in. This is in the context of improving productivity. So your thoughts on improving productivity where you've got low volume but high variety in a manufacturing environment? Sean, shall I?
Great. Thank you very much for the question. The question of variety is something that we will return to several points in this workshop. And let's be clear here, the definition of variety in this case is where the variety is adding value to the customer, as opposed to inherent wasteful variation in our processes. And when we've got low volume and high variety, then what we're looking to do is to create a high level of agility. Now, I don't want to steal where Rich is going to next, but as Rich has already said, these things join together. So I'd say the major part of this is, how do you organize your operation, your resources, your management systems, so that you're able to have that necessary agility to create the best use of your resources at any one moment in time? I think that's my initial reaction to that question, but I appreciate it's a complicated answer that will take more than what I've just said. So
yeah, indeed, and I agree with that, Sean. I think it boils down to discovering the things that are changeable and are within realm of control. But also, in the next couple of points, we'll talk about how do you make the decisions with data that tell you what those priorities for improvement are to improve the productivity. And I think that's the key message. It's the fingertips on the organization, and having a measurement system that's sensitive enough and easy enough to use without being drowning in data to focus on those key items.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, just building on that, and again, I think we'll probably return to this later. I think one of the crucial things in a low volume, high variety manufacturing environment is please look after your team, because what will absolutely kill your productivity is losing your experts. And then the opposite route is, how do you make sure that everybody is an expert? Because one thing I'd say about people, they're brilliant at creating variation, but they're also brilliant at handling variety. And I think that's going to be a crucial part of the solution. Yeah, great.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got another question in from Chris, who has asked me to ask it on their behalf. Given the scarcity of people, they tend to import labour from manifestly low-cost geographical areas. How can we make process and people produce the value, let alone dealing with the erratic and prohibitive supply chain due to the pandemic?
So the first thing is context matters, to answer that question specifically. Depending on what the setting and the requirement of the people, now may be the time to justify R&D into things like automation or robotics or whatever, depending on the process. It may not be appropriate, I don't know. But if it were, the one thing that's one of the things that's getting in the way of that slightly, as I mentioned earlier on, which is why this is a really challenging place to be, is the cost of capital. That's making that more challenging. But business cases are changing very rapidly, and the digital automation may be part of that. And don't misinterpret this answer, Chris. My answer is I'm not saying all solutions lie in automation. It may be completely inappropriate or not possible in the environment you're talking about. I get that. I think in order to answer that question properly, we need to start talking about item 2 on the list, because there's different elements in that I think will be of benefit.
Okay. In fact, you've taken the words right out of my mouth. I was about to say, if we were to look forward into improve your agility, I like very much some of the words that you've used in there, particularly around anticipate, detect, respond. But I'm sure we'd all love to be able to do that, but we don't have quite the crystal ball necessarily. So there's something about the tools that we need, don't we, to be able to do that sort of work. What are your thoughts on that, Rich?
So I think you're right. It's about the anticipation and detection. And when you talk about respond as well, it's respond appropriately. So one of the questions we often ask when looking at our customers' processes are, how able is your management system and your measurement system of A, giving an accurate picture of what's going on, and B, enabling you to distinguish noise from normal day-to-day operation, abnormalities from noise, i.e. the normal day-to-day operation. And therefore what you do with it, because there's this unmeasurable and unknowable amount of time that can be wasted on pursuing perceived abnormalities. And that's a real challenge for people to start getting their heads around, especially when you talk to an experienced manager. I know my operation, and I'm sure they do. But without an appropriate measurement system, you can't hope to be responding to the correct things in the correct way every time.
In this situation, I always think back to, well, why have we got the problem in the first place? What stopped us from being agile? When we started up our business, that's why we were able to grow fast and become successful and go so hugely. And I think about, what is it that stops organizations being agile? And very often what I see happen is as we reach a certain size, it doesn't even have to be that large. Even a medium-sized corporation can fall into this problem. And that is where we start making decisions based on how we organize ourselves rather than how we organize the work. So the classic example of this is, what department am I in? Who feeds me? Who do I feed? And I live in my silo. We've all heard of silo thinking time and time again. And in terms of breaking through this productivity barrier without losing quality, I think we now have to take seriously what we've known for quite some time, and that is the age of the top-down organization is what is causing the breakdowns between bits of the organization, making work get lost, making the responsibility unclear. And now we have to take very, very seriously that time to move horizontal and start building our organizations on a basis of value stream. That's the team we need, so that when the work comes in, it goes all the way through and comes out the other end without stopping. Or if it does stop, we've already got a cross-functional team working together to root cause analyze and fix it so that it doesn't happen the next time. So unfortunately, I suspect a significant amount of improve your agility also means biting the bullet and saying, it's time for us to let go of our comfortable silos.
Okay. I've got a question that I've been asked to ask you. They're looking for an example. I'm just giving you a bit of pre-warning on this. Get your thinking caps on, chaps. Could you share an example of improvement of a balance between standardization with agility in a manufacturing environment? And that's from Vibor. Thank you very much, Vibor.
I'm just trying to think. If you hadn't said in manufacturing environment, because obviously I've spent more time in service environments, but whilst Rich is thinking of a manufacturing example, I'm going to cheat and cut off the last few words.
And why not? It's our webinar.
Because, yes, but these are our customers. So the crucial thing when I'm working in services, because standardization often kills quality of service. So what I talk about when I'm working with service organizations is we can't always standardize the process, but what we can standardize is the quality to make sure that the customer always experiences what they wanted in the format they wanted it at the time they expected it.
Yeah.
So I think the crucial thing here, whether it's manufacturing or a service environment, is the right balance is the one that makes sure that you are not doing anything at all that is putting the standard above the performance.
Yeah.
I know that's quite an abstract one. It's not an example, but that's the principle that his question brings to mind.
So very quickly, as an example, now I've read the question rather than hearing it. I could hear the words, but for some reason they weren't going in. I don't know why. Now I've read the question on the screen here. Sure. Manufacturing operation I was working in just before year before the pandemic, whenever that was, 2019. So one of the questions around the agility and standardization, this was a repeat manufacturer, but with several different product mixes going through the operation. Where we got to with that was having visual management that identified upcoming customer needs to enhance the scheduling process. The key of the standardization element was how the product was produced, depending on what the product line was. So the machine setup, the staffing that we required, depending on the commodity. And then the agility piece was staffing up or down, depending on customer demand, that we had foresight of, because we were interacting with two things. One, the supply chain team, who knew if we could get the raw material. And the second was the customer service team, who had foresight weeks ahead of the plant had of upcoming demand. And that was a great balance. So be agile in terms of responding to the customer, but do it in a standardized manner so they get a repeat quality product.
Thank you very much. So let's move on. I've got some other things and points in the chat. I will come back to those later. Thank you. Please do keep your questions coming. Love challenging
Please
you
do.
both.
I am. I'm enjoying this more than I thought I would.
Reduce complexity. So what, in your experience, actually creates that complexity in the first place?
Sean, when we were discussing this earlier on, you came up with a great analogy about it was kind of complexity versus
complicated.
Complicated.
Yes. So was it last year? I was doing one of our webinars on innovation, and I introduced during that a very, very useful model called Cynefin. And within that, two out of the four aspects of that model are complexity versus complicated. And the real world is complex. And we can't deny that. If we assume things are simpler than they really are, we will undercall and underdesign our processes. And that will, of course, drive in waste, and then our productivity will fall and our quality will fall. If we make things more complicated than they need to be, the same thing applies. We will have too much waste in the system, productivity fall, quality will fall. So what we need to be very careful of is make sure we understand exactly the environment, not just the voice of the customer, what's the context of the environment, and then design something that is no more or no less complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah.
And one really useful thing, I'm sure most of you have heard this before, it's one of the classic Toyotas, is when we're designing a process, we want to design it so that for an appropriately skilled person for that process, that an average person can succeed on it every time after they've been trained once. So I think that's a great operational definition for what's the right level of complicatedness for handling complex.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's what I would absolutely look for. And then specific to that, how would we go about doing that? Well, number one, a lot of organizations make sure when they're building their work up, they layer things on, sticking plaster after sticking plaster, extra product line after extra product line. There's one telecoms company I worked with where the Pareto chart of volume of sales by product, the top 2 products accounted for 95%, and the other 370 products, the remaining 5%. That was overcomplicated for the customer, and so they just sold 2 because they understood those 2. So how can we do? So first of all, we want to reduce our product lines only to that which makes sense to provide the value. Second thing is create a very clear mechanism for reducing conflict in priorities. So if I have 2 pieces of work to do, as a matter of fact, from an organizational strategy point of view, which one should I do first?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a management decision. Managers got to be very clear about that. Then look for your scarce resources. They may be scarce resource in terms of machinery. They may be scarce resource in terms of the expert. And they may be scarce resources in terms of space, whatever the scarce resource is, but look for the ones that are overburdened, because the scarce resource that are overburdened will be creating shockwaves back into the system and forward into the system in terms of unnecessary waste.
Yeah.
And then, of course, make sure we properly understand what the customer is looking for, which means a much deeper, much more intimate conversation where we define exactly what they mean by value, back to the point earlier. And my final point on this, sorry for the long list, but it's a complex question. My final point on this is every time you have a handover along your value stream, it's an opportunity for error, opportunity for delay. So a crucial thing to do is get those jigsaw pieces fitting together so that there is no delay, and every opportunity for error has been properly simplified out until we've got 0 remaining failures in the system. So sorry for the long list, but that's my...
It's a good list.
So 2 things I'll add to that, keep it brief. One is on the subject of the range complexity and services complexity. It is probably one of the most common reoccurring problems we see in our client base. The key to addressing it is looking at the data, as Sean suggested here, and then the behavioural thing, and I'm not going to burst into song, is letting it go. Just let it go, folks, if the data says that the customer isn't validating it. But it's the CI role to make sure that you understand whether the customer values it, and understanding that voice of the customer. We talked about assumptions earlier on. Well, that feeds right into whether this range complexity is necessary. The unknown cost of well-intentioned sales decisions to offer variety and a complex range has untold cost within the organization that's very difficult to measure. But when you do try and measure it and you're successful, the picture is often quite grim. So there's some significant wins in there. And the final point I'll make, I think you've got a question, the final point I'll make on this is one about the importance of the CI practitioners. When looking at this, it's about the CI practitioners' behaviors of seeking to understand why a process is why it is, rather than seeing it's bad, its results are bad, and questioning the motivation of the people that created it in the first place. You can almost certainly guarantee that a process, when it was designed, was done for the right reasons. Understand those reasons. You do not have to agree with them. They may be irrelevant. They could be wrong. But at the time, they thought they were doing it for the right reasons. Understand and go and seek and find out why. More often than not, you can trip up as a practitioner on that very point of making an assumption that this was just lousy process design in the first place. And people that came before did this for me, created this process, therefore it's irrelevant. There'll be some nuggets of wisdom in there, I guarantee it.
Thank you. So this is in relation, I mean, interestingly, to your point about these all interrelate, but this is in relation to your point 4, around eliminate and reduce variation, and what you've just been talking about with regards to range, of course, but it's and the question is, our customers are creating our variation rather than them having a range.
Don't they just?
You know, and you've talked about adding value. Well, how do we add value if we then have to limit that for the customer?
You want me to go first? Go ahead. Okay. So the first thing to do is go back to what's the core purpose of your organization. Because the customer may be asking for something that takes you away from the core value you're there to provide. Yeah. It is perfectly legitimate for you as an organization to say, that's a great request. We even understand why you're asking for it, but the cost of us providing that to you was probably going to do more harm than good. So therefore, the honest answer is that's not our product line. Yeah, you can walk into Tesco and ask them to start making you a really lovely cake, or some other supermarket, personalized with all these things, and they'll say, yeah, got the wrong shop. So that is the first thing, is do not allow into your business work. And you've already mentioned this, Rich, about working with the sales team to be very clear about this. Again, the IBM case study from 1990s is a classic case in point for people who want to look into this. So that's first thing, but let's assume it is in line with your core purpose. Then what you're looking to do is make sure you can absorb the variety at the earliest possible point in the process, because you have two fundamental choices. I call them the Ford route. Again, I'm not an expert in this, but this is based on the limited research I've done on it, where we have the plants designed to make one brand of car, and that's very efficient for that one type of car. And then what I call the Volkswagen route, which is where we go all hell for leather on platforming, which takes an awful lot of time and energy to build up. But once you've got it, it has got huge flexibility in the plant. Now, forgive me if I've given any incorrect information there, but that's based on the research I've done some years ago. So the point being here is, if you have too many processes, that's complicated, and you're likely to create waste. Have too few processes, back to the standardization question earlier, then you're going to have waste and so forth. So the magic for me about reducing variation is, what's the fewest number of processes we can have, and we can always reduce the number of processes by getting better at absorbing the variety right at the front. And that means having your expertise usually where we've hidden them. The person taking the call needs to know the answer, for example. Yeah.
I've got a question from Adrian. Thank you, Adrian. Do you still see organisations that don't get the point about taking out rework leads to improved quality and performance? Unfortunately, Adrian's still seeing that.
So the answer, the answer to that, Adrian, is, ironically, it varies. Yeah, it really does vary. So we see pockets of absolute consciousness and acceptance of that, with varying levels of responsiveness, because it can often fall into the too difficult pile. And then we likewise with the observation that you sounds like you're seeing, we see that that's still an argument to be had, but increasingly less so these days. I have to say, it's not often we have to have that debate. People get it. It's resisting the means to doing something about it that would be, I would describe as the bigger challenge these days.
I'm just thinking about the link to management information systems and management prioritization attached to that. Because one of the causes of that behavior is they're still using unit cost as a measure. Because it looks like we can improve our unit costs if people keep working rather than doing it right first time.
Yep.
So if we eliminate the mindset of what's the lowest unit cost at a particular point in the process, and start saying, what are the key measures, the end-to-end value stream measures? What's the management system we need to be able to see that in terms of the volume of demand? Is it going up, down, or staying the same? What's the resources required? Machine time, people time, skill set, whatever. What's the money, obviously? What are the resources required to meet that? Is that going up, down, or staying the same? Back to our control charts again, we've got a picture of here. And of course, performance, the quality measure. Are we doing it right? Are we doing it on time in the right format? And what we want to see is that the resources required staying the same or dropping, because that's what we're talking about, better productivity. But we also want to see the quality going up. And we can only do that if we align our value streams to the volume of demand, which itself might be varying up and down because of all of these shocks in the system. So we can only really fix this issue if our managers can, at a glance, from the top of the business to the team manager, I can see, as a matter of fact, for the area I'm responsible for, those three things, and how are they currently performing? And the measures have to be aligned to value, not unit cost.
Yeah, and it's intriguing you mentioned that. The example I was talking about, the manufacturing example earlier on with the agility, cost per kilo was the driver.
Yeah.
It was the measure that in theory made sense, but when you dug into the behaviors and the processes that it created, not alone the financial processes it created, it was counterproductive and drove the wrong things and did not benefit the customer. And the other things I'd add on the, on this challenge around elimination or reducing variation we haven't mentioned is it is key to understanding the stability of your process in order to make improvements.
Yeah.
And the second thing, just finally on this point, know the process that you're measuring. Very poignant of some of the some custom material I was working on last week. We revealed as we worked through with the customer that actually, again, this assumption thing was being made around the process, and they were measuring variation using SPC, but the people making the decisions based on the SPC didn't understand the process that was being reported upon. And that, that was intriguing.
Yeah, it's trying to manage by wiggling something. Tampering, I believe it's called.
Rich, just could you do a quick summary for?
Yes, I just saw the question about the three
absolutely.
things. So the three things. Hopefully, it's the right three things.
What's the question first of all?
Velda's asked us to repeat what are the three things for the managers to focus on.
Yes, and I think
So-
actually, sorry, what I was going to say is, what we'll do is we'll pop those into the chat.
Yes, of course.
If we can do that, that would be great.
Lovely.
Because I'm conscious that we've got a fifth point that we need to get to, which is the identifying opportunities for automation. And I just wondered if you could give us a bit more about that, Rich, in summary.
Yes, indeed. So I mentioned earlier on that this could be perceived to be a solution to some of the first four items, and that is true. It could well be. So it is one of the possible answers. There's several things I'd make a comment on. It's not going away. Both mechanical and digital automation are increasingly, particularly digital automation, are increasingly the responsibility of the CI team and the CI professional. I made this point in a session I did, a webinar I did last year, that it's up to us to take the lead. To getting to grips with the possibility. Possibilities are key. But it's so important that it's not treated as a panacea. It is not the cure-all for all things. I'd make this point as well, that digital process automation can be very powerful, but it is also problematic potentially as well. And that is a fact of life. So what I would say finally on that point is about the requirement for requiring a robust but not arduous business case, and thinking about all the 8 items that we laid out and asked for your perception on. Several of those can make the great case for this, can also challenge it as well, not least the skills required for it.
Indeed.
Sorry, Suze, just a quick techie point. I managed to send one, but then it closed down the option, so I need to send 2 more.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Really love that your questions are coming through. We're going to try this open mic next time, definitely.
Was no one willing to take up the challenge? Oh, I'm disappointed on a Friday afternoon.
Customer's always right, Rich.
Well, the customer is always right, I know, yes. It was worth a shot. Thanks, though, for the fantastic discussion. So finally, a few points I'd like to make, just to summarise this up, some few final thoughts. So hopefully one of the consistent things you've heard through here is about making decisions with data. When considering the challenge of productivity, don't rely on gut feel alone. Do constructively challenge your assumptions, and critically be open to challenge, especially if you design the processes, so therefore they're yours, you feel it here. But come back to point 1 here. Where's the data that will prove or disprove this theory? Make sure you do understand what the customer there values, what they really value, not what is assumed that they value, and not what that people within the process or outside of the process think that they value. Update your understanding of what's possible. Research is key. The solutions that are out there and the different ways to tackle problems are extremely varied and rapidly changing. And then the final point I'd make on this is use the tools. The core CI tools that so many of you know and love will serve you well when dealing with this topic. If there's a sense of urgency, then is the time to apply them even more, not to sidestep them. And we see that so often. And really, when they are used and used appropriately, the results will be far greater than you anticipated.
Thank you very much, Rich. And thank you, Sean. So if you are free and would like to come back on the 25th of March, we've got our next PMI Live webinar. Who knows what new things we'll be trying? We're definitely going to be trying that open mic. But to
With a bot on the other end.
but to the fifth point that Rich made previously, we're linking nicely in our next webinar to automate or not to automate a continuous improvement conundrum. Do remember, if you can't make it on the day, please do register and then we will send you the recording the following weeks. But hopefully we look forward to seeing you there and look forward to you joining in the conversation. So as you can see on the screen down, there's a range of new content, thought leadership content that we've released this month. So we have our Leading for Business Excellence podcast with Bob Pagada.
Is a must listen, I can assure you of that. It's absolutely fantastic.
Thank you. It was fantastic to have the opportunity to talk to Bob. Bob is the president and COO at Jacobs Engineering. He is, a leader who, to be admired, really. He's got some really interesting beliefs and is a very authentic leader. And I recommend you listen to. But I would say that.
Yeah, no, it's not least because you're on it.
Indeed. Our Room for Improvement practitioner video series with Joel Weimer from Jaguar Land Rover talks a lot about a quality mindset. So really interesting. And as I said, to automate or not to automate in 4 weeks today. So more information on everything that's available can be found on our website. For those of you who joined us today, please do look out for our customer survey that we'll be sending to you. Love your feedback and love your thoughts on future topics. So that brings us to the end of today's PMI Live. So on behalf of PMI, Rich, Sean, and myself, thank you very much for joining us, for your contributions. And we look forward to seeing you next month.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend.